Hello, my science lovers. We've got This Week in BS, This Week in Bad Science. With us is the incomparable Amanda Cortex from Brief Brain Facts. We are going to talk about depression, myths, realities, and treatments. So glad you're here. Your approximate wait time is about a little less than a minute. If you haven't checked out Amanda's channel, you totally should. It's amazing. She talks all things about the brain, all the brainy stuff. She has a great storyteller one recently. Why do we tell stories? And I'll put a link to her channel in the description. Now I'm going to take a minute to play my patron video. I need to add some new patrons to that. So, Mark and I believe Derp State. I haven't added you yet, but I'm going to in Rhetoric and Discourse. Alrighty, we are live. How are you guys doing today? What's up? With us is Amanda Cortex. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
This is awesome. You've been on here so many times. This is great.
Yeah.
You're always a lot of fun and you're always so knowledgeable. It's awesome.
Well, thanks.
So, we're going to talk about lots of different myths that surround depression. So there's been a lot of to-do about suicide rates and, you know, what causes depression, what kind of treatments are there, that sort of thing. So we thought we would talk a little bit about what the myths are and what the realities are and what kind of treatments are out there. So, Amanda, let's start with you. I know you've been on here a few times, but there are people that probably not seen before. So go for it. Tell us all about you.
My name is Amanda. I think you did a great introduction initially. Not sure if I can add much to that, but I do have a YouTube channel where I discuss the brain and behavior, and it's called Brief Brain Facts. I enjoy doing the videos. It's more instruction kind of based videos, not a lot of like live streams and things like that. I do a live stream about once a month. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's what I do. I am heavily into the neurosciences and even psychology. I was trained, went to graduate school for, and obviously passed graduate school.
Yay! You know, graduate school is its own discussion right there about mental health. You know what I mean?
For sure. And actually, behavioral neuroscience and psychophysics.
Awesome.
So that's what I know. That's my wheelhouse. But we're going to talk depression today,
That
right?
is absolutely okay. Yeah, we're going to talk a bit about depression. There's so much stigma surrounded around that. And it's quite frustrating because I have friends and family who suffer from depression. And so, even being I don't suffer myself. I have anxiety. So, I
Mhm.
mean, I'm very open and out about that. But I don't myself have depression. I've never been diagnosed. But having been a person who supports people who have depressions, being part of their support network, it really kind of just gets my goat a bit when I see all of these different particular people that kind of pop up and say, well, you can just get over it. Go take a walk in the woods. It's just think happy thoughts like it's freaking Peter Pan and Pixie Dust. You can fly then if you just think happy thoughts.
It's
And so
unfortunate that, yeah.
it's frustrating. So,
So,
what do you think about all this? Let's just start with that.
well, I'm just going to start and kind of just say what depression is
Mm-hmm.
and go from there. Will that work?
Awesome. That
Depression,
works for me.
depression is considered a mood or affective disorder and is
Mm-hmm.
characterized by a sad and or angry mood state,
Mm-hmm.
sense of hopelessness, guilt, and anhedonia, which is a loss of pleasure in usual activities or activities people once found
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Right.
There's also a lot of sleep disturbances people
Mm-hmm.
can have, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
bouts of insomnia can
Mm-hmm.
accompany these mood states. There's also psychomotor retardation, which
Right.
is basically stunted movements,
Right.
stunted facial expressions. But
Mm-hmm.
also at the same time, you can have psychomotor agitation, which is kind of like, I don't know what to do with my hands, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
that could be uncharacteristic for the situation. And difficulties thinking and concentrating, fatigue and loss of energy. And when it becomes particularly bad or problematic is
Mm-hmm.
when people start not only having these things or these thoughts go
Mm-hmm.
on, but also have it corresponding with thoughts of
Right.
death and suicide. And that's when it becomes obviously something that absolutely needs to be 100% addressed by a medical professional.
Right.
Just for people out there, depression does often, or not maybe often, but it can lead to suicide
Mm-hmm.
and suicidality, which is the taking of one's own life.
Yes.
Suicide is one of the leading causes of death throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
So again, for this troubling condition, we need to take it very seriously and have a
Right.
very serious discussion on what it actually is and what it means to those that are affected by it. It impacts about roughly 5 to 10% of any given population, which is actually a large chunk of the population, and it has a lifetime
Mm-hmm.
prevalence of 17%. So people have throughout their entire lives, a 70% chance of developing depression at some point. There's been an interesting note about depression, and now whether
Mm-hmm.
it's because diagnostic criteria has become a little bit more sophisticated, it's not
Mm-hmm.
really quite clear why this may be the case. But depression there's been a substantial increase in the disorder throughout the United States within the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so this has led a lot of researchers to believe that there are both biological and societal factors at
Mm-hmm.
play that may give rise to this particular illness.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, there's a good, pretty sound link between economic hardships and suicide.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, just to give you one little data point here, is that during the height of the Great Depression,
Oh yeah.
1932, suicide rates throughout the United States nearly doubled
Mm-hmm.
from that of the previous year. And so there's definitely some sort of thing going on with what not suicide, but what society has done or can do to even alleviate symptoms of depression.
Right.
It's not really One other thing that I think is really interesting is going on with this societal cultural aspect is that there's also
Mm-hmm.
cultural studies that have shown that depression and suicide are nearly non-existent in tight-knit communities and groups. So we're
Mm-hmm.
talking more like indigenous tribes. The
Right.
Amish, for instance, have very low rates of suicide and depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really not entirely clear why that's the case, but
Right.
there's something to be said for like having a close-knit support system. So you could still have depression, but it may not lead to suicide if you're able to openly talk about your feelings and have a nice little support system there to help guide you through it because it's hard. I mean,
Yes.
I mentioned all the symptoms that could accompany and often do accompany depression in and of
Mm-hmm.
itself.
Right.
And it's hard to function.
It
So
is a whole body experience for many
it really
people.
is.
I mean,
It
you
is.
feel physical pain, you're cold. It's it's a and sometimes you can't even formulate words or
Right.
coherent sentences. I
Mhm.
mean, it's your brain essentially trying to kill you to a
Right.
degree.
Well, I
Um,
mean, and take it into this aspect of people who are depressed aren't thinking straight.
no.
Um, and so if you're not thinking right, you're going to perform poorly on some needed tasks to function in
Hmm.
our current society. Like your job's going to suffer. Your
Right.
home life may suffer if you have these mood states
Hmm.
going on, and your friendship circles will suffer. And
That's
you in
why.
but if you don't
Hmm.
have a friendship group that knows that you're suffering,
Hmm.
they won't be able to help and support you. Um,
Right. And it's in, I actually wrote an article. I worked with several different people,
mhm,
and I got various perspectives of what depression was like for them individually. And
right,
so, since I'm a non sufferer, it was important for me to kind of reach out to them and say, okay, what is it like for you? And
right,
one thing that I wanted to kind of articulate in that particular piece was how to respond as a non sufferer. What do you do? What is helpful? What is not helpful? What is harmful? And
right,
one of the things that they found that was right across the board, talk to the person when they're not low and find out what are your signs when you're low.
mhm,
What do you feel is usually something that you need during that time, even if it's just not being able to communicate or have a conversation. Maybe they just need you to sit there and hold their hand or just be around them. You don't
mhm,
really have to speak or talk or anything. And so it's really important that you communicate with your the person that you care about, that you're supporting, that suffers depression, when they're not low, so you can understand potential triggers if there are any. Sometimes there's not, and what it is that they need when they're riding that storm. You know.
mhm. I think that it's very interesting too for non-sufferers if they've ever gone through a relationship breakup, if they've ever lost a loved one.
Hmm.
Those feelings of loss, those sad feelings that you feel then is very akin to what people with depression feel,
Right.
just more frequently, and it may even last longer. This is why it's very important when you diagnose depression in a patient, you
Hmm.
actually have to weed out for things like bereavement because it mimics depression
Yes.
so acutely. And if you miss that and diagnose somebody that's bereaving, that's going through
Hmm.
like a breakup, a divorce, a has just
Hmm.
lost a loved one, and you don't ask them if they are actually experiencing them, you can misdiagnose somebody with depression,
Right.
even though that is considered a state of bereavement. And a
Right.
lot of people can understand what it's like to grieve, and it's like that
Hmm.
a lot of the times.
And it certainly kind of seems that way too. Some people lose an appetite. Some people they don't get sleep and then they overeat during that time,
Right.
and then they feel guilty for overeating, and so they have all that kind of shame. And then they feel, and another thing that I got a lot from people that I've spoken with, they feel an incredible guilt for not being able to communicate well with friends and family, or not being able to go out and spend time with them, or to leave the house, or to do certain things that people they're in relationships with, or friends and family expect them to do. And it's not that they just don't want to do the thing, it's that they can't do the thing. And that, but even if they know that they can't, they still feel a tremendous amount of guilt, which compounds the horrible experience overall, the grief and in the grieving period.
Absolutely. I mean, it's rough for people who experience these. It is an illness. In fact, it's one of the highest mental illnesses, or I guess the most prevalent mental illnesses in the world, clearly.
Yes, and it's the number one killer of men worldwide.
Exactly. So
that's what essentially International Men's Day is about. And I think it kind of bugs me when I see a lot of people, they'll go, well, every day is Men's Day, and like the super hardcore, very radical feminists. And I'm sitting there going, I'm not about that. We actually do need to openly talk about how depression is the number one, suicide is the number one killer of men all over the world. And that's kind of what International Men's Day is about, is raising awareness about that. We need a space for people to be able to talk about things without being shamed.
And that's why suicide tends to affect men more than women too, because they're less likely to have a support system. Because of whatever expectations, like in Western society in the United States, it's very individualistic culture. The man is supposed to, not
suck it up,
those types of emotions, that type of vulnerability. You are constantly in a vulnerable state.
Man up. I mean, that's a phrase I hate. I hate the term man up.
And so you've got men that may be struggling, right? But they can't communicate that because of the fact that they're like, well, I'm supposed to be the strong one, because mental illness often is viewed as a sign of weakness as opposed to being a health condition.
I need to say the description is off. Brian, for whatever reason, I have a hard time with the immediate live stream. This is Amanda Cortex. She is from Brief Brain Facts. I will correct the description after our talk. And you can, and all the information will be there. This was kind of put together very quickly, so that is my fault. Brian was as a lawyer on anti-vax stuff, so he was on weeks ago, and for whatever reason, YouTube is a bit glitchy. This is Amanda. She is from Brief Brain Facts, if you're just joining us, and I'm sorry that the description is incorrect. That is my fault, and I will fix it so you can go and click on her channel and check out all her brain stuff. She's awesome. So please carry on, Amanda.
I think we're talking about men not being able to...
It's not socially acceptable for men to cry. Boys don't cry. Boys will be boys. Man up, titty pants, whatever they say. You know what I mean? So it's frustrating because men have feelings. Men need a place where they can go and vent and emote without any kind of shame,
Right. And I think that's something that we could all do better with in our own individual spaces, is just saying, like, men are okay. You know what? Women not only need to be able to be happy, because that's kind of like, women should just be smiley all the time, but it's acceptable that they cry, but they aren't allowed to show any anger.
Yeah.
We need that type of thinking is off for both men and women, right? So we need to be like, women can be angry, men can be sad. We're human beings. We are capable of having these emotions for a reason.
Right.
It was obviously adaptive for us to do so. And
the more congenial we are, the more likely we are to find an admiring spouse who will take care of us so we can stay home and have babies, right? It's like our society kind of pushed that upon us. I mean, even for a period of time, women only went to university to find a doctor husband. And that was, I mean, that's still within just the last century. I mean,
I mean,
women
that
were
was
only
still,
able
that was
to.
a stereotype from the school that I went to. I went
Yeah.
to an Ivy League for undergraduate, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, there was a lot of people saying like, "Oh, women only go to that school to find a rich mate,
Yeah.
male,
Yeah.
a
It's
rich
just,
husband."
and
And
it's
I would, every
frustrating.
time I heard that, I was like,
And there's so many men that probably would love to be like the homemaker. There are great stay-at-home dads. I mean, and the funny thing, a lot of dads don't have changing tables in the men's room, and
right,
so that's an issue too. So it's a lot of, we see a lot of this societal issues that pop up that don't
mm-hmm.
allow men to be nurturing, caring. They don't see them as parents. They don't allow them a space to be sad. They don't allow space for a woman to be angry, because then she's just too emotional. So it's insane. It's just we've got to do better. We've just
Yes,
got to
we
do
do.
better.
Let me move on to kind of some more of like the depression aspects.
Sure,
Um,
absolutely.
and so what we do know is that there are some chemical and physical differences in the brains of people with depression.
Yes, yes.
Um, One hypothesis deals with an overactive enzyme called monoamine oxidase, or MAO.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've heard of this.
Yes, MAO inhibitors, MAOIs, as they say. Yes.
Mm-hmm. This enzyme destroys catecholamines and serotonin.
Mm-hmm.
So in the brain, it acts on what's known as the diffuse modulatory system, which is a
Mm-hmm.
system of related structures,
Right.
where norepinephrine and serotonin are the primary neuromodulators. In people
Mm-hmm.
with depression, this enzyme acts kind of too well, if you will. So they kind of destroy the neuromodulator too
Mm-hmm.
quickly, or destroy too much of it.
Right.
So there are drugs available that inhibit this process called MAOIs, like you mentioned,
Right.
for monoamine oxidase inhibitors. The problem is, actually, SSRIs kind of work off of this hypothesis too, just to be
Right.
real.
Right.
Which is another form of drugs, but this one, SSRIs work on kind of not necessarily inhibiting the the MAOI,
Right.
the
They
MAO part.
they slow
But they
down
work
the
on,
the uptake of serotonin. So it
right,
makes
and
it
so they
more
work
present.
on kind of that kind of in the synaptic
Mm-hmm.
class, instead of
Mm-hmm.
and allow the serotonin to kind of sit there for longer than would normally be. Usually you have a flush, like kind of an influx of neurotransmitter. It gets released
Right.
into a synaptic cleft, and it sits there for a bit until it gets shot into the next neuron.
Right. Right.
And so it kind of uptakes it. That prevents that process, or at least slows it down a little bit.
Right.
The problem with this hypothesis is that while the drugs can nearly immediately work on like the neurotransmitter system or the MAOI,
Mm-hmm.
the MAO, I keep saying MAOI, it will take weeks for one's mood to become stable, right? And
Right.
this is the problem why like there's not an immediate fix for this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have a caveat though. And another issue is that drugs that do act on, like, say, norepinephrine, like cocaine, they don't produce mood stabilizing effects.
Right.
Cocaine is very kind of temporary mood elevator, to some extent, but it does not have long-term effects. So this kind of led researchers into another direction. Now, I do want to note that the majority of currently available medications do work on this hypothesis regarding serotonin and norepinephrine and the MAOI.
Mm-hmm.
The MAO, holy crap.
MAO, MOA,
Yeah.
or MAO.
Wow, yeah.
Mao, like almost like Maui, but no E, Mao.
This has led researchers to propose another hypothesis that I believe is a bit more credible, because this is I'll get into why it's more credible in a moment. It's called the diathesis stress hypothesis.
Okay.
So this hypothesis states that kind of the environmental and biological factors converge at the what's known as the HPA axis. This system or axis controls glucocorticoids.
Yes.
Glucocorticoids. I'm sure this probably sounds familiar.
Right. Yes.
So glucocorticoids are very effective under temporary stress conditions.
They can cause damage over a long period of time, though. Can they not? To like, okay, I'm sorry.
So
I'm jumping ahead.
You are. You're like reading my mind. So
great minds and all.
So glucocorticoids help with kind of your flight or fight response.
Adrenal gland stuff.
Very good under temporary conditions. However, long-term stress may result in an overproduction of these glucocorticoids. And it was discovered that they actually may impact the brain by potentially killing brain cells. Overabundance of glucocorticoids. So this seems like a lot more credible because of the two things. There's one about ketamine that I'm going to get into.
Yes.
But the first I do want to mention is that there's a high comorbidity between depression and anxiety, and the HPA axis and the diathesis stress hypothesis is very credible for anxiety. So it seems like because of the high comorbidity and what I'm about to mention about with ketamine, that this seems to be a very likely hypothesis. So ketamine, I have a video over it.
Yes, I remember. Yeah, it's a great video, by the way.
So recently, the FDA approved a ketamine-like substance or a ketamine derivative for the treatment of traditionally treatment-resistant depression. The reason being is because this ketamine acts immediately and improves mood state immediately. So for people that are suicidally depressed, this is a very, very real option for them. And for obviously traditionally treatment-resistant depression.
I have a quick question or something that Winkle the Bernie Bro. Thank you for the $10 super chat. He says exactly what I wanted to bring up. My issue with antidepressants is they seem to be created working off a flawed hypothesis. I'm no user, but I've known others who seem addicted to their meds now. What are your thoughts on that, do you think? If you want to digress for a moment and then hop back.
Sure. So I don't necessarily think the MAO hypothesis is flawed. I think that it's still just a potential idea. The brain is a really interesting place, and so it could be that. And let me back up. A lot of the things regarding medications and treatments were discovered by happenstance. And I'll give you an example about lithium. So lithium is a well-known mood stabilizer, one of the earliest ones that became available and was also shown to be highly effective. And the way that it was discovered was by testing on guinea pigs and urethra.
Oh, wow.
Anyways, like urine.
Yes.
And the stuff in urine. And so the idea of that particular researcher was that there's something in the urine that needs to be investigated. Anyways, because this particular researcher did not have anything available that he wanted to use to test it, to test the idea about the urine stuff. It's kind of gross.
Urea? Is it urea?
Thank you. Why? Thank you.
It's
Sorry.
Okay.
I was like, urethra. I know that urethra is like the guy, in the.
That's the tube that the pee comes out of. You're welcome.
That part. I couldn't describe it, but I was like, that is the wrong one.
The little tubey thing, the tiny straw that the pee comes out of. That's the urethra. Your readers are from the kidneys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyways, it was all just kind of like, well, it's available. Lithium's readily available, and it's on my shelf.
Yes.
And so he tried it, and it ended up increasing the mood in guinea pigs. And so it was completely an accident, and or just it was lying about. So I might
Yeah.
as well. And a lot of these treatment options
Uh-huh.
were discovered very similarly. Just
Right.
it happened to look like it helped.
Mm-hmm.
And what the hypothesis with the MAO and the diathesis stress hypothesis,
Mm-hmm.
they still involve very similar neurotransmitters too, if
Right.
they do address them. And so while maybe norepinephrine isn't the main neurotransmitter that needs to be addressed, but serotonin absolutely is.
Right.
Um, so you'll see that in the diffuse modulatory system, for instance, which is a system. I think I mentioned this, but I'll mention again, of related structures that kind of use the same
The same neurotransmitters
neurotransmitters
and communication.
and neuromodulators.
Right.
So you'll see that, okay, the diathesis stress model also uses some regions out of that diffuse modulatory system. Not all of them, but some of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, you'll see, like in the HPA axis, well, the hypothalamus is part of that, the diffuse modulatory system. And so it's a reasonable thing to assume one over the other. The reason I, as a person who has read this stuff, lean towards the HBA model, the diathesis stress model over the MAO model, is because of the fact that in depression, people's dendrites are not as elongated, which dendrites are just kind of, if you think of a neuron or a brain cell as a tree.
That's where I was going to go. Branches. Yep, the branches have to grow.
Right. And the dendrites are the branches.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the ones that kind of reach out to other brain cells to create that connectivity so that they can continue talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And when you have, in people with depression, they're not as long. Mm-hmm. And so it could be that this glucocorticoid has damaged this part of the brain cells, and has thereby severed some of these dendrites.
So essentially, those glucocorticoids, they think, might have actually shortened those particular branches to where there's less communication between the brain cells.
Across brain regions, right.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about ketamine is that ketamine grows those branches. And
that's cool, isn't it?
Isn't it really cool?
Grow your brain cells back with ketamine, kids.
Right. And so I do want to make note that it doesn't mean that the brain cell isn't there. It doesn't mean that the brain cell can't communicate. It just means that it may be having trouble.
It's a bit more difficult to get the message.
It's a bit more difficult reaching one area to the other with shorter branches. And so ketamine helps elongate those branches. And I think it's fascinating. I think you guys don't know how excited I am about ketamine, guys. I think that this, from what I've read and about it, it seems to be a very, very viable option for depression.
For particularly the ones that are very, very difficult to treat, and medication and all of, and therapy hasn't worked. And I know they're looking at, there's the derivative of it that was recently approved by the FDA, the spray, right?
Yeah, the nasal spray. But doctors do prescribe ketamine off-label for depression too.
And there are various clinics, I think, that are throughout the U.S. and they're completely legal. My understanding is they're completely legal for you to go.
In certain states, yes.
So, but it's pretty exciting. And I guess maybe having a derivative, another version of ketamine somehow seems, I know there's a stigma associated with drug addiction, and people think, oh, ketamine, that's got to be a drug. We can't have, actual drugs that are street drugs do a thing. But if it works, if it's something that shows to be beneficial, I don't know why they chose to go with the derivative. as opposed to the actual ketamine. I'm not quite certain. I haven't
Well,
dug
the
into
reason
that.
that I mean, just based off of what the makers claim is that
Hmm.
it doesn't have the same effects of ketamine that traditional ketamine does. And ketamine was synthesized in a
Hmm.
lab too, which in and of itself is a derivative of
Hmm.
cocaine. But as far as being addicted to antidepressants,
Hmm.
I don't know about that. Um, I think,
Hmm.
I think we have to be careful what we claim to be addiction as well,
Hmm.
because addiction doesn't mean the same thing. I mean, if they're prescribed and taking it as prescribed, I don't know
Hmm.
if I would classify that as addiction. If
There
it,
was, I know there was one particular, I think it's Ativan, an anti-anxiety. That's
mhm.
part of a group of, I forget, is it benzo? I think it's benzo, benzo something with an A and a P. I can't remember.
Diazepam?
Yeah, I think it's those benzodiazepine. Those I find from what I've read, long-term use is not considered an acceptable use for those particular anti-anxiety meds,
I
um,
mean, yeah, because you
because
do have to increase your dosage with
over
them
time, and
over
so
time,
there's a
and
risk of, I
there's
think,
a huge risk.
tolerance of
There's a
that.
huge risk. With benzodiazepines, there's the risk of not only having to increase, but
Hmm.
also of drug mixing.
Right. You
So,
can't have alcohol with that particular one.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't because yeah, it's bad. It bad. It'll
Yeah.
kill you.
Yeah. And you're welcome, Winkle the Bernie Bro. He says, thanks for the long digress. Sorry for sidetracking the convo. It's relevant. It's relevant to what we're
Yeah,
talking about. So
and I got my spiel about ketamine in there. I just wanted to make sure that if I ever have a discussion on depression, I'm going to try to mention ketamine as much as possible.
why not?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just, I actually did an episode of my show on antidepressants, and I did touch on benzodiazepines
Mhm.
and all the different types of anti anxieties and antidepressant medications, what's prescribed for what. It was very much like a generalized type of thing. I know you get more into the heavier aspects of that, which makes your stuff awesome.
More like
So,
the pharmacological properties.
yes, that
Um,
sort of thing.
like the benzodiazepams, I wouldn't consider to be an antidepressant.
Right, those I believe are anti anxiety.
They're actually a depressant in and of themselves.
Mm.
So I would not do benzos with anybody who had depression. Anxiety, maybe. But yeah.
Somebody, I think Alias Fake Name has an interesting question. So this is along the lines of potential treatments for depression. What are your thoughts? Do you know anything about transcranial magnetic stimulation? Because I've heard lots of different things
Yeah.
about that, pros and cons, even for as a possible treatment for people on the spectrum. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about
Okay.
that.
Transcranial magnetic stimulation. I am not opposed to that at all. I
Hmm.
think I think it's a good alternative for
Hmm.
DBS, which is deep brain stimulation, which has
Hmm.
been used in people with depression as well. It's actually surgery that is DBS surgery
Okay.
that that they stick like a little thing in your brain,
Yeah.
and it changes it. They try to do some electrochemical stuff. It's basically like a little electrically charged needle.
Hmm.
And I may be explaining this wrong, because I think there might be somebody in the chat that knows more DBS than I do.
Hmm.
But they initially tried it in people with Parkinson's disease
Okay.
and found that it did help elevate people's moods as well. But transcranial magnetic stimulation is just basically it's a non-invasive way to see how your brain changes and reacts and how you react. It can be used to shut off parts of your brain. Um, and I think it's really cool because if you're a brain researcher, like I was in a former life a few years ago, um, a lot of the studies that we do are correlational,
Mm-hmm.
but because all you just your brain areas are associated with each other, and so you kind of look for increased activity here, and you try to relate that with whatever task you might be giving to a participant. That for human research, it's a little less so for other animal research.
Right.
But the TMS allows you to knock out people's brains, portions of the brain, so that you can actually make predictions as to what will happen. So you went from a correlational study to a full experimental study. And that's fascinating to me. That's fascinating. The biggest things that I have seen as far as people complaining about it or the trouble that they've had with TMS has been headaches. A lot of the time, like immediately following the procedure, have been very, very intense headaches. But outside of that, I haven't really seen a lot of people have problem with it. I honestly don't know how it is to treat depression. I know that the university that I went to, they were in a few years ago. It's a big research school, and they were kind of the first to do the studies on TMS and depression, and they were conducting the studies at that time.
Right.
So I don't know if what they found, but I mean, if they found very positive things, I don't see why you would need I don't see what would stop you from doing it, considering that all the major side effects is headache, right?
Right.
It's better than, I mean, you can weight gain, weight loss, diarrhea, whatever, with the other medicine, with the actual medication.
Right.
And there he is. DBS is surgery with electrodes placed inside the brain and a remote control used by the doctor in clinic to change settings and test mood state change. So thank you.
Thank you, Erin A, also for the super chat. I was about to read that, and I was like, "Oh, she got it. Never mind. That's awesome."
Well, because I knew he was I saw his name in the chat, and I'm like, he did the Parkinson's disease research. So okay. I wanted to. I knew he was there and would be able to better explain what DBS was than myself. But they have used DBS for depression as well, and same thing. It's very invasive. I would recommend TMS before DBS personally.
Yeah. I would think invasive is less desirable. is a last possible option, kind of.
I mean, it's for people that are severely depressed that just nothing worked.
Yeah, and see, people are different, and I know one thing that kind of bothers me is the different types that, well, this worked for me, it should work for you too. But it's the brain chemistry is so delicate and so incredibly different with each person, and depression can manifest differently in each person. So for somebody, to sit there, and it kind of bugs me when they sit there, well, all you need is just to think better and think better thoughts, or this worked for me, it should work for you. It's like they take their own anecdotal.
Well, I mean, there we go again. All you need to do is think better thoughts. Well, like I mentioned, right? People with depression are not thinking straight.
No, they're not.
Of thinking better thoughts or thinking the way that you expect them to think.
Right. And it's frustrating for me because I feel like I don't often get all ragey on any social media, but it does kind of bother me when I see people actively shaming other humans for taking medication in order to function as a human being. And they have either they have a gross misunderstanding, or they're just downright horrible humans. They're just garbage humans. And so I can't help but just sit there and go, okay, I'll smite them down with the ScientistMel smite. Yeah, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And then I'll try to counter that with all the accurate information that I possibly can do. But it's really frustrating because sometimes
it's not as sensational.
No, and it's just all you're doing is perpetuating this kind of harmful ideology that depressed people just need to get over it. Just take a shower, go out for a jog, and like, but if you're feeling physical pain, just to get out of the bed, you don't know how, you can't speak, you can't think properly. Taking a shower is going to take all of your energy for the entire day.
Oh,
It's just
absolutely. Yeah.
it just
Can't.
it makes me so ragey because I mean I've almost lost family members to suicide. And I'm going, okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's not so cut and dry. And you know what? If taking a walk makes this one person, if exercise is how this person copes, that's amazing. And I am so glad that you can do that. If
Mhm.
taking a medication with therapy helps another person, and maybe they tried exercise, maybe they don't have the energy, maybe they don't have the time, maybe they can't do it, maybe their body hurts too much and they can't do that, then let them take their meds. Let them do their therapy, and the thing is you were right about the support network.
Mhm.
That is so incredibly important. And I do tend to see, because I hop around on various forms of social media, sometimes that is somebody's support network. So
Yeah.
if they're there and they've got their group of people that they talk to, hey, I'm struggling. Is anybody around at 3 a.m.? Oh, somebody's up in the UK,
Right.
then they can talk to that person. To me,
Yeah.
that's an invaluable resource. But at the same time, if you see somebody who's struggling, who comes across something horrible, some harmful type of toxic statement that says there are too many people on medication, all you need is to pray better, or if you're a Christian, your particular, you don't have a good enough, relationship with Jesus. And I'm
Mhm.
not trying to make this about religion, but I see that often, particularly with different types of individuals that I encounter. And I'm like, that is so not helpful. And
Right.
that shames a person and makes them think that if they are a person of faith, that makes them think that they're not even good enough for their religion. And on
Right.
top of that, they must be punished for this. And when you're not in a right mind, that may tip the scales over to I'm ready to end it now. You know?
Right.
And that just enrages me to a degree.
It's troubling when you have people that aren't they don't know what yeah, like they don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They're not medical professionals. They are not researchers. They are
No.
not experiencing these things themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that exercise doesn't help. In fact, the benefits
Right.
of exercise are prolific. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's exercise is one of the best things that you could do for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
both physically and mentally.
Right. It
We
is a
weren't
good
so
thing.
sedentary.
Mm-hmm.
Our development through evolution, we were very active as a species,
Right.
and but we've become increasingly sedentary, and
Mm-hmm.
so it would make sense that we'd have ill health effects from that. But
Mm-hmm.
you would probably not be a very good doctor if you said, take your medicine, bye.
Right.
If you
Right.
didn't say, please take your medicine, what's your support system like? If you
Right.
didn't say, please take your medicine, what's your support system like? And when you start feeling better,
Mm-hmm.
consider, implementing some sort of exercise routine in your daily life,
Mm-hmm.
or your weekly life, or however.
Mm-hmm. Even,
You'd be
it's
a very bad doctor to not do that.
right. Right. And sometimes it might take the medication to get you to where you're at a point to where you can feel like you can go and exercise, which is
Right, or at
fine.
least to where it feels like that physical pain you're feeling is gone or
Right.
has been
Exactly.
alleviated to some extent.
Exactly.
There's also been some studies to show that hot baths help.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you have to really go with, you know,
What can you do
works for
today to
you.
take
What
care of
can you do
yourself?
today to take care of exactly
Yeah.
and take it day by day?
If you can
Because,
go for a walk, that's great, but that may not be today, and that's all right too.
because right, and that's something that we all have to take into account before the existence or the known effects of ketamine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else that maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
just now getting treatment for depression, it's not
Mm-hmm.
going to kick in for 2 weeks to a month later.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what do you do now to help yourself? Well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I can go for a walk 30 minutes a day. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
I can, take a hot bath,
Mm-hmm.
and just do something for myself.
Right.
Because until the medication kicks in, you're going to still be probably suffering and a lot. And the medications don't work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they do work on a model that assumes that that's what's going on in your brain, when that may very not be what's going on with your brain.
Exactly.
Specifically, if you've experienced like childhood trauma, for instance, that
Mm-hmm.
would be more akin to the diathesis stress model,
Mm-hmm.
with the dendritic spines and stuff like that. And so the MAOs and the SSRIs probably may not be a good option for you.
Yeah, and and it's
Something else that's
interesting.
happened in your
Even
brain.
even when you look at like anxiety, there's like clinical anxiety, to a degree, but you can have trauma-induced anxiety
Right.
versus something else, and the way you treat those are completely different, and it may take a while to figure out what exactly is it that's got
Right.
this going. And so the same thing can happen with depression. If you're taking medication, the first one you take might not work. It might be like horrible. It might exacerbate your situation.
Right.
So they'll put you on something else, or it might be a couple mixture of things. And so it can take time. So it's just,
Does take
gosh.
time.
Yeah.
It's like, with people that have an opinion, because this is all this
Mm-hmm.
is with those guys. They have an opinion about it. And it's just, that
Mm-hmm.
opinion is just as informed as if I said, well, shame on you for not taking a hot bath to help yourself. I mean, just how stupid is that to say? Like, yeah, it may help. It can help.
Oh
Some
my
people
goodness.
have shown that it's beneficial for them, but it doesn't work for everybody. And it may not
Yeah.
even be a long-term solution.
I mean, it's true that. And it's kind of funny because I sit there and people, and to me, neurotransmitters are required for life. Okay.
I
You
mean,
have to
yeah,
have
not just
them,
for you, but for everybody.
but for everybody, so they're required for you to live and to be able to function as a human being. I mean, you
Hmm.
can't just, your brain has to be able to communicate with itself and the
Right.
rest of your body. And so for somebody to say, well, just do this, just shift your perspective. You need to think happy thoughts. You need to focus more on this. You're like, well, that's it's a biological thing. So if your pancreas isn't working so great and you need insulin, you can't just will your pancreas to suddenly start making insulin.
Right.
It doesn't really work that way. You have
Mhm.
to inject it into you and you need it. I mean, that's just how diabetes works. And so it's for like the same thing with depression. People don't see it as an illness in the sense of like diabetes or, making too many corticosteroids,
Right.
making too much of this or not enough of this thing. I mean, we have hormonal imbalances that causes problems in people. That's even more recognized than depression. People who don't make the appropriate amount of hormones. They're like,
Right.
okay, here's a man that's growing breasts. He has too much estrogen. We got to treat that. That's a real issue. Not this depression thing. Well, you still have a chemical imbalance, and we kind of need to shift this harmful perspective
Well,
that
it's all
like that.
about, well, mental versus physical, right? We can
Yeah.
see the physical manifestation of too much hormone, too much type of hormone. Like
Right, right,
men with too much estrogen is growing breasts, and
right.
that can correspond with a lot of social shaming and things like that. And oh my
Hmm.
goodness, they're abnormal now.
Yeah.
Whatever. But with when it comes to abnormal behavior, which I want, like, sorry, let me interrupt myself, and just mention that the 5 to 10% prevalence rate, for depression is for like those that are diagnosed. Just there are a lot of people that go undiagnosed their
Right,
entire life,
right,
or end up dying before they get diagnosed because they committed suicide. And
right.
so you're dealing with something that is a silent epidemic, and it's hard to see it,
Hmm.
and then there's a lot of shame too. I don't remember where I was going with this, but I feel like there was a reason why I was bringing that up.
Physical manifestation of disease versus not physical, like i.e.
Right.
depression.
Yeah. And so when you have a physical versus a mental manifestation
Mm,
of an illness, it's hard to treat because there's no one-to-one correspondence. We know that if we give um, person more
mm.
um,
We give them a,
testosterone or
yeah,
whatever it is
yeah.
to diminish the estrogen in somebody's system,
Hmm.
that'll help diminish their physical appearance of femininity.
Right.
Um, but we don't know what's going on in somebody's mind or how they're feeling unless they tell us. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, so it's complicated.
It
It's
is
more
very complicated.
complicated than some people um, that just go, well, get over it, or well, you just need some God in your life.
Yeah. It's
It's a
it's
lot more complicated than that.
it is a lot more complicated, and I think because people think, well, since it's in their brain, they should be able to control their brain, and they should be able to just think this badness away, And you're like, well, I understand your thought process, but if your brain isn't working right now, it's not going to work for you suddenly. If you're like, okay, let me just think really hard. I still kind of feel like it's the analogy of the pixie dust and think good thoughts and you'll fly. It's
Right.
just, it's about as useful as that. We don't have magic pixie dust and we can't make
Mhm.
people fly. I really wish we could. I think that would be great.
I know if
But
we could, I'm sure like everybody would be addicted to it and nobody would ask
yeah,
questions.
freaking pixie dust. Can you imagine the traffic? You could just fly to work. It'd be great. But it's about as saying something like that's about as useful as that. And I'm going, it just you can't just make something go away, especially if it's affecting the very thing that controls everything else. I mean, so if you can't think properly, the rest of your body, it's a cascading effect. But
Right, it
it
is.
just it
And
frustrates me. I just get really mad.
you should be mad about that. Everybody should be angry when people, I mean, here's the thing. If somebody is saying, well, just think better, right?
Yeah.
They are really saying, I don't want to hear what you have to say.
Yes, they're
I don't want to
dismissing
hear
you. They're
that. It's
dismissing you.
it's a very dismissive response because anybody who has experienced that themselves or at least know the mechanism behind that are going to say, wow, that's a real serious issue and you need
Yeah.
probably to consult with a medical professional.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I know that that's probably a pretty cold response too. I don't have a good response for it, but it's got to be better than just think better because that
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
work. You
I
can't.
some.
That's like,
Mhm.
would you tell somebody with schizophrenia to think better?
I mean, and it's funny because people who have schizophrenia tend to know, like, okay, Jack Frost should not be whispering in my ear right now, but Santa Claus is laughing in the corner. This ain't right. Because usually
Right.
they can sit there and go, does anybody else see Santa Claus in the corner? No?
Right.
Okay. I mean, and I actually, as a teacher, I actually had a schizophrenic student who
Hmm.
would come up to me and go, I had a dream about this girl and she had a necklace on. And it was like a magic necklace. And then I saw her walking down the hallway and she had the necklace on. What do you think that means? And I'm sitting there like, okay. And then she would talk about how Santa Claus was in the classroom and that he would visit her at night. And Jack Frost was involved in the Easter Bunny. She was all about holidays, but her mother consistently kept her off of medication because she felt like she's just got to get over it. And I was like, this is so incredibly harmful. Your
Yeah. Yeah.
child is sitting in my classroom talking about how Santa Claus visits her every night, and she knows it's not right. She
Right.
looked for validation from me, going, "Do you have that too?" And I'm
Hmm.
like, "No, I don't. Have you talked to your doctor?" And now she was distrusting her doctor because she felt like her doctor was trying to hurt her because her mother didn't want her on meds. And I'm like, "Oh my god," you know.
I mean, I would be okay. So schizophrenia has a high heritability rate compared
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of other mental illnesses. I'm wondering if the mom had like sub-threshold levels of
Possibly.
schizophrenia, because if you distrust doctors so much to where you're not willing to have your own child on an antipsychotic,
Mm.
um, that's that's another level of paranoia. And paranoia is a
Mm-hmm.
big thing with schizophrenia. And a lot of
Yeah,
with schizophrenia, maybe the mother had like schizoaffective disorder, and
possibly.
it was a full blown schizophrenia, and the child. I
Mm-hmm.
worked with patients with schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm. It's
It's a great
interesting.
patient group. So they're so big hearted, wonderful people, and
Yeah,
it's unfortunate that that their illness has been associated with so many dangerous things
right.
that are
It's
actually are more akin to psychopathy
right.
than schizophrenia.
It's
It's
frustrating for me
sad.
because, and I'll talk to people who suffer depression, and they almost feel guilty for asking for help. And they'll sit there and they'll know, they're like, I'm really, really feeling bad. I'm really
Right.
low. I don't know what to do. And one of the things that they don't need to hear is, I don't believe you.
Right.
And somebody
Yeah.
had mentioned in the chat, they said one of the best things that you can do for a person who's really low is to say, I believe you, and acknowledge the fact that they're going through this. And they know it's not rational. They know,
Mhm.
they're like, I should really be able to go to work right now, but I can't even talk, and I'm cold, and I'm
That's a sign
hurting.
of irrationality too,
Mm-hmm.
because if they know that they should be doing it, but they're going to probably try to do it anyways,
Yeah.
but they shouldn't be, and nobody should expect that of them in that.
Right.
And so it's irrational for society and themselves to expect that of them when they're
Exactly.
feeling like that, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a flu. It's literally like having the flu long
Yes.
term.
And and it's a chronic disease. It pops up and it goes away, just like a cold, just like a flu. But it incapacitates. It can be like mild symptoms all the way to, I am not getting out of this bed, because
Or if I get out of this bed, I'm going to commit suicide.
yes, exactly. I'm going to
So,
stay where I feel safe right now.
mhm.
And so it just, I don't know. I guess I wanted to kind of spend time discussing this because of the constant things I see, and I try really hard to get as much correct information out there for people to be able to go, okay, this is, and I feel like if you're able to explain things in several different ways, maybe one particular episode I didn't resonate with somebody, but perhaps another one did, and like, okay, this is a bit more of what my speed is, and that's kind of like the teacher in me, I suppose, is to say, all right, this particular, she did an episode on this, but that didn't quite hit what I was trying to get across to another person. Hey, go watch this episode. They cover everything that I need them to cover. So I often revisit depression. I actually did a whole separate episode on my channel just about depression. And then I talked about the medications associated with it. And here we are talking about the stupid myths that people seem to think are real, and they're not. Also, if you believe that, I have some land on Mars I would like to sell you. I can give you a bona fide certificate that's from a Martian.
Yeah.
So, if you believe these myths, hey, give me some money and I'll sell you some land on Mars. You
I
can't
mean,
get it, right away, but hey.
it just surprises me how much people distrust science or distrust medicine
Until it
or
suits their narrative.
right. So gosh, I don't know. It's just strange to me. And yes, things are not perfect.
No.
Um, but the thing is that doesn't make you credible in your assumption. It
Right.
just means that maybe we have more work to do as a community and as a scientific community. We have
Mm,
more work to do.
we
Um,
do. And
and
some
it's just
days, even
surprising
for
to me,
me, some days for me are just not good days for battle. And I'm just like,
right?
I can't even go there today. Because sometimes I get crippling anxiety to where I don't necessarily have the same manifestations as depression. I'm still able to function, but I
Mhm.
have to walk off, take a minute and go, okay, deep breaths. Let me pull my app out. We're going to breathe for a minute because I'm getting kind of ragey. Because I do tend to get a temper sometimes with certain things, especially when I see people being intentionally cruel to another human, especially somebody who is suffering a mental illness of some kind. I'm like, yeah, and no, we don't play with bullies here. So,
Yeah.
so I'm just like, I have to take a break sometimes, even from doing my shows. Sometimes I'm like, okay, guys, I am not well. I need a break, and I'll take a break from social media, and I'll take care of myself. And that's something also I think as science communicators, people like you and I, even we have to have our own mental health days and go, I am not doing this today.
Yeah.
I am going to take care of me a little bit, and then I'll come back and we'll be firing all cylinders. And so don't burn yourself out, Amanda. We need you too.
I'm doing the best I can.
Go do your gymnastics. I've watched those videos. I'm like, that's awesome. Look at her. That's a strong girl right there, man. We should have our own superhero shirts. We should come up with our own like superhero league.
Yeah, I don't know how I can integrate that gymnastics. No, because like if I'm like gymnastics brain, then it's
You're
like
doing mental
I'm doing mental
backflips.
gymnastics all the time to like lie or justify things and or to maintain cognitive.
No, it's mental gymnastics trying to explain hard science to the general population.
It can be rough.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Absolutely. And but it's really kind of interesting to see how far people will go and they'll misuse science. And I'm just like, yeah, don't misuse science to push your own bigotry and your own oppressive narrative. That's not okay. And I've been seeing a lot of that.
I just don't understand why people continue to platform those people. Like even if I mean, I guess it just gets views and they know that they're bonkers and nobody's going to
Yeah.
believe them. But I mean, there's something to be said about just watching a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I don't, I would rather have the correct information out there. And we can rip apart ideas without giving publicity
I agree.
to
I
certain
think so too.
people. And how you do that is say, okay, this is what's wrong with everything. You don't even have to talk about a person. You can just talk about, because that one person is not going to be the only person that thinks that way. I
Oh, yeah.
promise you. You're going to have lots of people that think a particular way. So to me, it's best to just hit the general idea. This is what a lot of people think. This is why it's wrong, and this is what science has to say about it. And you can say I'm wrong too. That's fine. But I'm going to say, where's your evidence? And if you don't have any, then I'm like, okay, I'm still going to ask for your evidence. If you don't have any, then I'm going to expect you to clarify your particular statements or retract as necessary. And if you don't do that, that speaks more about you than it does me. And I don't need to have a further conversation with you or talk about you. So that's kind of how I feel about it. So I like to take horrible, horrible ideas. Now, if it's like a huge organization like PETA or David Wolf or Deepak Chopra or Goop or some kind of nonsense like that, yes, I will actively talk about that organization. But if it's just a person, that's small potatoes, man. Let's hit the actual idea, the core of the issue, and let's
Right.
talk about that issue, not the person. Who was it? Was it Eleanor Roosevelt who had the quote about what smart people do, and petty people do? Petty people talk about. Oh, I gotta find it now. I
Other
gotta find it
people?
now. Oh, and Winkle Bernie Bros. Thank you for the $2. It's always Mars. We Plutonians get no love.
Oh,
Oh boy.
I think Pluto's not even a planet.
It's a yeah. I met Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's still salty about the backlash he got for that.
What?
About saying that Pluto's not a planet. He's still salty. He's like, it's not a planet. And then I decided to call it a dwarf planet just to get all the
Just
people
to appease people.
yes.
I think it was been downgraded since like the 90s, so it's not a
Yeah.
new idea. By
Yes.
hashtag Pluto
Here
is
we go. Here we go. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Small minds discuss people.
There we
So
go.
that's what I'm talking about. Talk about the ideas and rip those apart if you need to, especially if they're oppressive and harmful.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the people on there to do that.
I mean, there's a lot of harm when you God, what's a good way of saying this? When you tell information about mental health that is inaccurate or is not as
Yeah.
true as you can possibly be about it, because it's already so um like talking about it is already so discouraged. It's already kind of in the back channels anyways, right? It's
Right.
not a part of mainstream society to accept mental illness
And I
as a legitimate illness even.
and even because there's so much stigma around certain ideas, particularly about depression and anxiety, you're to have somebody on your channel that pushes an oppressive narrative. You're already going to have a lot of people that are going to be able to resonate with that because they've been brought up to think similar thoughts. And so
Right.
all you're doing is perpetuating that particular harmful stigma by allowing them an opportunity to sit there and explain their side. And you're like, we already have enough of that. I mean,
We have
the
too much of it. That's the majority of it. Because
right,
people aren't scientists and they aren't medical professionals, not everybody. And so
right.
they don't have the same tools and resources that even you and I have access to or
Right.
know how to get to, right?
And even then, if they got like this particular papers, they would have to spend so much time just learning the vocabulary.
Right. Yeah. Half of graduate school is doing that.
That's really kind of it. Yeah. So it's just, and so that's why people like yourself and me are kind of needed because we're like, okay, this is what the paper is. This is what it looks like. This is where you can find it. You can dig down into it, but I'm going to break it down for you. And this is what we're talking about in this. And please trust me. Here's all my sources and all my stuff. I try to be as transparent as I can be.
Oh, yeah.
You kind of need to be able to establish that trust with people to say, okay, I can trust this person because they're transparent. This is where their evidence is. This is where their sources are. And they're genuinely trying to get across the correct information without sugarcoating it, without being mean or rude. I mean, I don't get that. I don't understand some people.
And I think that it's also helpful because we can also say, well, this isn't, like I presented both hypotheses and said, like, I'm leaning towards this one because of, the recent stuff with the ketamine. It's not even recent, but I guess the approval was recent.
Right.
And why that was very important because we see structural differences in the brain of people with depression, not just chemical. And so I think that's something else that can be added to the conversation. It's like, I can even tell you where you're right in your idea of thinking like a tight-knit community will help or can help, because that's probably more true than not, because of the rise in depression that we've seen at least in the United States, right? So there's something to be said about having a community. Now, does it have to be religious based? I don't know. I don't know.
Goodness. Winkle the Bernie bro. He's given us so much love today. Thanks for the super chat. He said, I learned a good deal from watching this. I'm going to look into MAOs and SSRIs as well as how ketamine is now being applied. You gals rock. Awesome. If you need access to good resources or good sources, let us know. We're both on Twitter. And I actually did an episode on anti-anxiety and antidepressants. You can find that on my channel as well. And brief brain facts here. She actually did a talk just on hallucinogens and mentioned ketamine on her channel. So go check that out because she's all about the brain stuff and she gets into heavy detail about that as well. So we're coming up on an hour and 15 minutes, man. We could probably, we could talk for a long time, I feel.
Yeah, probably.
We could talk for a long time. This has been awesome. Any last thoughts that you have in regard to depression myths, realities, and treatments? Any last words you got?
I don't know. Not necessarily anything to add to what I've already stated. I just think that we all need to be a little bit more empathetic when people come to us.
Kindness is free.
People are, it takes a lot. And I do want to say that it takes a lot for somebody who is in a depressive episode to reach out to somebody. So if they say, like, I'm struggling right now, I'm, feel really down, it takes a lot for them to do that. And you should feel special in a way for being somebody that they trust enough to come to with that information. So don't blow them off.
No, not at all.
Try not to blow them off as best as you can. Again, it's not something that, like, it's a burden it can be a burden if people use you as the only resource, of course. And so make sure that you maintain some sort of boundaries as well. But
Yes.
definitely, you should keep that in mind if somebody with depression does come to you and says that they're struggling and need help, or just even struggling. Um, like
Absolutely.
Mel mentioned, definitely acknowledge that they're feeling that way, and whatever. You know where I'm going with this.
I know where you're going with that. I actually wrote a piece, and I'll put it in the description as well. How to respond as a non-sufferer, and it was a piece that I worked with probably 15, 20 people who suffered. I know that's a small sample size, but they at least let me know, and I'm willing to update it. So if you're a person who is a sufferer of depression and you check out that piece, if there's anything that you feel like I need to add to it, please let me know, and I'll toss that in there. It's meant to be an informative piece for people who don't suffer on how they can appropriately respond without doing more damage. And that's
Right.
essentially what we need to do. I mean, kindness is free, and a small act of kindness can go a long way, especially with somebody who's struggling. So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you so much for being on my channel, Amanda. I'm
Well,
gonna
thanks for having me.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
update the description so you guys can go check out her stuff. How often do you pump out a video every week, don't you?
Every week.
What
Yep.
day? What day can I go check
On
it out?
Wednesdays, every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday. So we should come up with a hashtag for that. With a W. We should come up with a hashtag with a W. Aaron, that's your job. You're in the chat now, and I see you there. Help her come up with a hashtag for Wednesday, for associated with her brain facts that she does. And thank you guys, all of you guys in the chat. Thank you guys for being here. I hope this is helpful. If you have any ideas for this week in BS, or if you have any feedback, please be certain to leave it in the comments. Hit us up on Twitter. We're both there. If you need additional resources, or if you feel like you need to reach out and ask if there's any way that we can help you, I'm around, and you can message me, and I can at least send you links to where you can go to find appropriate resources to get the help that you need. So, thank you guys for awesome. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Amanda. You're awesome. I'm just so happy that we got to talk about this.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, of course.
And thank you guys again. So I'm going to show my Patreon video. I still need to add Mark to it, as well as Rhetoric and Discourse and the Derp State. They're my newest patrons. And so if you can contribute, it starts at just $1 a month. I know Amanda has a Patreon as well, and you can help her continue to do the amazing work that she does. And so I'll put that in the link. I'll put that in the description, a link to her Patreon as well, so you can check out and contribute. Just buy us a coffee every month, even less than a coffee. $1 a month is less than a coffee if you like what we do. Hit us up and help us spread the good news of science.
Yeah.
Yay! So thank you guys again, and thank you, Amanda. And I guess we will see you guys. I'll be here again Friday night, tomorrow night, with Monty and Hannibal from the Shit Show. That's the name of their show. And we're going to talk about Valerie Thomas, who is a scientist out at NASA. And I have made a cocktail associated with that, and I'll get you the recipe as soon as possible. And then Saturday, I'll be talking about Ehlers-Danlos. So that'll be an interesting discussion on that. And thank you again, Amanda.
Yay, thanks.
Yay, okay. And thank you to my patrons, patron video, and thank you guys for being here. See you next time. Bye.